Thanks to Ubisoft ANZ, I got early access to Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, the new side-scrolling Metroidvania. I've just finished the main story of the game, and with that in mind, I'm going to list 4 things that make this game great, and 3 things that would make it a little better. Number 1 is graphics and style. The first thing you'll notice is obviously the art style. This game is beautiful and runs at a buttery smooth 60 frames per second on PS5, and from what I hear it also runs 60 frames on the Nintendo Switch if you can believe it. Throughout your playthrough you will come across many different levels, each with their own unique assets and colour palettes that really set them apart from one another and give them their own distinct feel. The assets are lovingly crafted, and from start to finish it just looks really pretty and sharp. And I love how the enemies will jump into the 2D battlefield from a different axis. There is one caveat though, and that's the cutscenes. Not gonna lie, some of these cutscenes make the game look a little outdated with minimal mouth animations, and it's quite the contrast against the beautiful gameplay. It also looks a little Fortnite-y, but it isn't terrible, and the camera work and styling helps to mask this minor setback. And speaking of style, The Lost Crown has tons of it, from cool counterattacks to the major boss fights. And just the way dialogue is displayed between character interactions is really neat. And as a big fan of the game Hades, I couldn't help but notice the similarities between both of the game over screens. And I do have to agree with this comment I found on Reddit. The main character looks like a zoomer who fell into a time machine and is trying his best to fit in.
And a heater. What is going on?
Number 2 is combat. So the way you handle enemies in Prince of Persia is purely through melee combat, limited arrows, and special moves called Athra-surges. When you first start out, combat will feel quite basic, and may even get a little stale after a while. But as you progress and unlock more abilities and time-based moves that also have utility outside of combat, the gameplay does open up. There are combo limitations of course, but combat can be varied by acquiring and equipping and eventually upgrading amulets. Amulets are one of the several collectibles in the game that you can find or purchase, and each have their own unique perks like firing multiple arrows or adding extra hits to your basic combo. Combat really becomes quite an enjoyable experience, and the feedback you get for successful parries and sound effects are awesome. And the enemy variety and how you are meant to deal with them is surprisingly vast. Bosses also have multiple phases and movesets that really keep you engaged throughout the whole fight. Number 3 is price point and demo. So this is a small scale project from the team who made Rayman Legends, which is another great game by the way. I was only expecting maybe a 10 to 15 hour experience for a game like this, but it was actually a lot girthier than I expected. In an interview, I think they stated it was around a 25-hour game, which sounds about right to me. You certainly want good value for money, but at the same time you don't want this style of game to overstay its welcome. In USD, the game sells for $50, and for us Aussies it's $69, which I think is perfect for what you get. There's also a demo available across all platforms. This is something we've been getting a lot more of in recent times, and it's a good risk-free way of trying out a genre you might be unsure about. I don't know the extent of the demo and how much you'll get to play, but it should be available at the time this video is published. And I dare say you will know within the first hour or so if Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown is your cup of tea. Number 4 is the level design and memory shards. The brain size required to craft such creative and intricate levels and puzzles is something that will always astonish me. The various traps and moving parts in each level not only helps pace the story in a desirable way, but also gives your brain the satisfaction of solving something difficult that requires thought and fine motor skills. The payoff is a literal dopamine hit that keeps on coming. The levels are seriously a major highlight in The Lost Crown, and as I mentioned before, each section of the map feels different and looks different, and they are all interconnected. There's also a wide range of environmental hazards with bespoke mechanics. For example, some parts have moving staircases that shift every time you turn your character, or possess blocks that try to crush you once you pass, so you have no choice but to keep moving. To get the most out of this experience and to see and collect all there is on offer, you will have to navigate through all of the danger using the abilities that are currently available to you, or come back later once you have the requisite skills. And speaking of coming back, Prince of Persia has this wonderful new feature called memory shards. This allows you to take a certain number of screenshots within the game that will stay on your map at the location you took it. This means that you can highlight areas that you will want to explore later on when you finally unlock the skills needed to do so. It's a really cool feature that I totally made the most of. So those are the 4 things that make The Lost Crown great. But what about the negatives? First of all, the checkpointing sucks. The game only saves after major plot points and when you interact with the whack trees that aren't always spaced generously. For the most part they are, but sometimes you might get sidetracked branching off into 3 or 4 different areas and never knowing when you'll come across your next save point. In that time you may pick up a few hidden treasures, and if you aren't careful enough you may lose 25 minutes of progress due to one too many slips. Understandably, every game comes with risk, otherwise it wouldn't be engaging. But I would have really appreciated a couple of quick save slots or an autosave function. Difficulty spikes. In terms of traversal puzzles and certain boss fights, things can get quite nutty. There were times I was just cruising around collecting amulets and time crystals, having a great time, then out of nowhere get hit by what felt like a never-ending barrage of moving spike traps and pitfalls. As I said, the game rarely autosaves, so running into these difficult areas would induce a certain level of anxiety. Some collectibles are purposely placed in more difficult to reach areas, but these will really only matter to true completionists and trophy hunters. But if you're anything like me and you see that shiny Xerxes coin just hovering there calling out to you, there is no chance that you will move on until that coin is yours. So yes, difficulty spikes exist here, but there is a nice little option that makes traversal easier for those inclined to use it. And the final thing I'll say here is that they could have done a bit more with the story. The cast of characters seem interesting and cool, but you don't get to spend enough time with them to form any kind of meaningful relationship with them. By the end I really only remembered 5 or 6 different names across the entire cast. The rest were banal characters with no time to explore their origins or really even get to know them at all. The introductions seemed promising with the legendary immortals blasting onto the battle scene and aiding you in your fights, but the story takes a sharp turn and you spend most of your time by yourself, or conversing with the few main characters who you got to know somewhat, but only enough to establish motivation and not much else. All in all, despite my minor issues with Prince of Persia: The Lost Crown, I've had a really good time exploring the beauty of Mount Cuff and putting my skills to the test in multiple inventive ways. I'm still working my way towards the Platinum Trophy, and Ubisoft have really kicked off 2024 with a new wonderful high quality video game.